today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Amanda Serrano versus Erica Cruz. Let's talk about the fight. I'm going to break down the entire card in segments.
Green versus Cedar Rose.
Nicholson versus Alvarez. Ali versus Matthew.
Baumgartner versus Mekhaled.
For this episode, we're going to talk about what we saw in the undisputed featherweight title fight between the two remaining featherweight champions, Amanda Serrano and Erica Cruz. And it was a fight that lived up to my expectations. I expected an all-action shootout, and that's exactly what we got. I expected that Erica Cruz, she's not going to break character. She will be that mid-range to inside pressure fighter that attempts to dominate the pocket and overwhelm the opponent with volume.
She stayed in character.
But in this instance, unlike in previous instances, she wasn't the biggest puncher in the room. Opposite Amanda Serrano.
The limitations of Erica's base style finally caught up with her opposite the ring, Amanda Serrano, because Amanda's a better technician.
Where Erica Cruz likes to let go of wide sweeping hooks and looping shots, curved punches, Amanda's punches are shorter, reach the target faster.
Talked about that ahead of the fight, how Amanda's punches are shorter and more compact, so they don't have to travel as far to reach the target. And in all likelihood, Amanda would get the better of the exchanges. She did.
Got the better end of the exchanges with Erica Cruz, who likes to lead with her head,
which resulted in a clash of heads.
Blood streaming down Erica Cruz's face throughout the majority of the fight. That had a noticeable effect.
Credit to Erica Cruz for hanging in there and hanging tough in spite of that noticeable gash over her head.
But she was able to hang in there in spite of that gash, unleashing salvos of punches. Ahead of the fight, I told you guys that Erica Cruz, she comes from high-altitude Mexico City, and fighters that come from high-altitude places, they tend to have very good engines, very good gas tanks, and they're very tough.
Durable.
Erica and Amanda, both being volume punchers, I anticipated a war, I anticipated a shootout, and that's what we got. But what separated them was form. Amanda's punches are more tight, more compact, whereas Erica's punches are a bit more wide, sweeping shots
that can be countered.
The fight's outcome really came down to form and function. Amanda Serrano has a more wide variety, a more wide arsenal of punches, hooks upstairs, body shots downstairs, straight punches from the outside.
An adjustment that we saw Amanda Serrano make in the second half of the fight, as exhaustion had worn in for Erica and damage.
The damage from all of those exchanges in the first half was setting in for Erica Cruz. Her attack,
shooting the jab and the backhand repeatedly.
Amanda was able to fend her off with straight punches from the outside, straight punches down the pipe.
Goes back to what I said before. Amanda's got a more wide variety of punches.
Whereas Erica's attack became quite monotonous after a while, after exhaustion and damage had set in. Tack on the blood streaming down her face from that cut that her cut man couldn't seem to get control of.
I want to say that Erica Cruz is a tough out, a tough night, a tough fight for almost any other featherweight in the division. But opposite the ring, Amanda Serrano,
she came up short. I could only give Erica two,
maybe 2 to 3 rounds out of the 10.
In a fight where both fighters are spending as much time in the pocket as these two did, and in a fight where both fighters are really letting their hands go, the rounds themselves and what's happening inside of the round may be competitive, but Amanda banked more rounds overall.
More of those competitive rounds. You have two fighters that are really letting their hands go, and that may give off the appearance, the illusion that it's a closer, tighter fight than it actually is.
I saw some gripes in some circles, small ones that felt the judges had the fight too wide, but as stated myself, I could only give Erica two, maybe 3 rounds.
2 to 3 out of the 10.
And it was just better. And it's not because Erica Cruz is a patsy. It's not because Erica Cruz isn't a good fighter. She's a good fighter. Amanda Serrano is just a better fighter.
An undisputed champion now.
Effectively making history for herself and the sport. Amanda Serrano is the first undisputed women's featherweight champion in the four-belt era. She's the first undisputed champion in the four-belt era of Puerto Rican descent.
She's literally the first.
The importance of establishing that lineage on this kind of stage cannot be understated.
Making history.
That's one for the record books. That's something that nobody can take from you.
The history that Amanda made yesterday.
And giving all those aspiring young fighters of Puerto Rican descent or otherwise something to shoot for, something to aspire to, and someone...
Amanda Serrano was already an iconic fighter. This just adds to it.
Irrespective of Katie Taylor and irrespective of a Katie Taylor rematch, yesterday's fight allowed Amanda Serrano to make history of her own, leave an imprint of her own, not exclusive to being a 7-division champion and procuring all of those world titles.
She established lineage in the women's featherweight division, a lineage that wasn't there before because she's the first undisputed featherweight champion.
There'd never been an undisputed women's featherweight champion before. She's the first.
Best featherweight, one of the pound-for-pound best fighters in the world.
When it comes to Erica Cruz, she's got nothing to be ashamed of. She showed real heart, real courage, and real durability going in there with the biggest puncher in the division, one of the biggest punchers in the entire sport, and being able to go the distance where most women wouldn't be able to.
Most featherweights.
The fight was everything that you want from a classic rivalry like a Puerto Rico versus Mexico fight.
Latest chapter.
Long line of fights in the annals of boxing history. This was the latest installment, and it lived up to that rivalry, those expectations.
It was a fucking war.
But Amanda Serrano came out on top, as I predicted, as I expected, and she is now this division's newly crowned undisputed champion. Congratulations to her.
She's amazing.
She's the real deal. They don't call her that for nothing.
She's got unfinished business with Katie Taylor. We'll talk about that in another episode.
I know you've pretty much you've been at 54 your whole career, but I mean, you're still a fighter though, so how difficult do you think it will be for Spence to go to 54 and then if he is going to fight Crawford, come back down to 47? Do you think he's
no, it's over. It's over. Once you go up, it's over.
You just going to kill the fans'
Oh,
dreams
it's over.
like that?
Yes, I mean, it's over. My thing is, I think that's the hardest thing to take the body up to a weight, get used to it, and deplete it back down, to go back down. I think I don't think we'll see the same Earl Spence going back down.
I have to agree with Tony, and that's why for the last 4 or 5 years or so, I stressed that they ain't got forever to make that fight, you know. Errol Spence Jr. making 147 pounds continually, it can't get easier over time. It can't be getting easier to do it. Thus, the ideal time to do the fight was in 2018, 2019, when interest in the fight was at a fever pitch, when the fight was hot, and when Terrence Crawford was still with Top Rank on the premise that Top Rank could afford to pay Terrence his guarantee, and PBC, they could afford to pay Errol Spence Jr. his guarantee. That between two separate promotional outfits and two separate platforms, the fight itself would have gotten optimal promotion and optimal exposure because there would have been two separate outfits on two separate platforms promoting it.
The same deal structure we saw ahead of the Wilder versus Fury rematch.
Their second fight, proof positive that such a fight could have been made, should have been made between Terrence and Errol.
You guys saw what Errol Spence Jr. said in 2018. Al Heyman gave him 4 names, and not a single one of those names was the name of Terrence Crawford.
I met Al Heyman.
I know.
Personally.
So have I.
What do you say?
Can we get both of them in the ring? Can we get both of them in the ring?
He said, I'm fighting Mikey. Then I might fight Sean Porter, Keith Thurman.
So he didn't mention Terrence, huh?
He didn't.
Not a single one of those aforementioned names and not a single one of those aforementioned fights had the same interest and the same profile as what could have been the Spence versus Crawford fight. But because all of those fights were in-house fights that didn't require Al Heyman to work with Bob,
That was Al's priority.
now, I don't know that Al Heyman was ever interested in actually doing the Spence versus Crawford fight. And that latest set of negotiations between Terrence and Al and Spence,
The negotiations that fell apart last year.
well, I'd be lying to you if I told you that I felt that Al Heyman was negotiating in good faith. When you put 4 names ahead of a Terrence Crawford fight for Errol Spence Jr., when you put 4 guys ahead of Terrence in the queue, even though Terrence is the guy that everybody wants to see your fighter fight,
When you do that, it can't be because you're interested in doing the Crawford fight.
when you do that, it must be because you think or you thought you had the luxury of time.
Because you had the luxury of choice, unlike Terrence, you thought you had the luxury of time.
You had the inside track on most of the talent, most of the notoriable fighters in the welterweight division, but let's be honest, people weren't asking for Errol to fight those fighters. They weren't asking him to fight Mikey Garcia or Sean Porter for that matter. And the fact that he was already on the same side of the street as Errol, that could have been a fight they revisited after a Crawford fight. But you don't put that fight before it.
You do if you think Errol's gonna lose to Crawford. In that situation, you do. Let's be honest. There's a reason they wanted to save Terrence for last. If they even had any intention of fighting him, there's a reason they wanted to save him for last.
Do you think he's
Oh, no, it's over. It's over. Once you go up, it's over.
You just going to kill the fans'
Oh,
dreams
it's over.
like that?
Yes, I mean, it's over. My thing is, I think that's the hardest thing to take the body up to a weight, get used to it, and deplete it back down to go back down. I think I don't think we'll see the same Errol Spence going back down.
For the longest time, I warned that Errol Spence Jr. would not be able to continue to make welterweight forever, and time was of the essence to do the Crawford fight. So if you want to do the Crawford fight, you strike while the iron is hot. And that time has passed. Interest in the fight hasn't peaked. It's declined over time, and this may be remembered as a bit of a sore spot, a black eye, a blemish on the sport of boxing, that this was so obviously the premier fight to make in the welterweight division, and for whatever reason, it didn't happen. It didn't get made. I like Tony Harrison. I think it's over.
I've been saying it here on the channel the whole time. I don't think Errol's coming back down. If his next fight is at 154 pounds opposite the ring, Keith Thurman, for no belt at all...
So by the time he shares the ring with Keith Thurman, it will have been roughly a year's time since the Ugas fight.
I don't know how this gets lost on so many fans, but that amount of time away from the ring and away from the action, it doesn't make making the weight easier, you know.
Those lengthy periods where the fighters aren't fighting. For Errol Spence Jr., it's a simple question. Why do you think his next fight is at 154 pounds? You got a lot of fan-driven narratives that the reason the fight's at junior middleweight instead of welterweight, where the fight was ordered, is because Errol doesn't want to give Keith the satisfaction of a title shot.
It's a cute narrative. Did you make that up yourself?
If not giving Keith Thurman
Queefy.
the satisfaction were the focal point of all of this, he could have simply petitioned the WBC to skip Keith Thurman altogether and go straight into the Crawford fight.
If this really were about not giving Keith the satisfaction.
I mean, that kills that narrative. If the whole thing is supposed to be he doesn't want to give Keith Thurman a title shot, skip him then. Fight Crawford.
He doesn't want to fight Crawford.
I don't think he ever really wanted that fight, to be completely honest with you. And I like Tony Harrison. I do feel that that ship has sailed. I do feel that it's over. Errol Spence Jr.'s next fight being at junior middleweight heralds a junior middleweight campaign, and it just so happens that the PBC has a stronghold at junior middleweight. They have most of the talent, most of the notariable fighters at 154 pounds.
They're going to do the same thing at 154 that they just did at 147.
So when Tony Harrison says that it's over, I happen to agree with him. It's over for that fight. That ship has sailed.
The fight is dead.
Finally, in men's super featherweight news, on the eve of his upcoming super featherweight title fight with O'Shaquie Foster, Ray Vargas says Navarette at 130, that's a fight that would be thrilling to Mexican fans.
It could be.
Emmanuel Navarette was in action this past Friday, saw himself become a 3-division champion, though he had to work for it, power through some adversity. It probably could happen, yes. Vargas said through a translator when asked about boxing Navarette during a virtual press conference recently. That's something that has been talked about ever since we were at 122 pounds when we were at 126. If it does happen at 130, it would be something that would be thrilling to Mexican fans. I'm aware of it, but right now, let's focus on this fight because it's all in the present.
The O'Shaquie Foster fight.
Ray Vargas, like Emmanuel Navarette, is making his bid to see himself become a 3-division champion, having spent next to no time in the featherweight division.
Ray, like Emmanuel Navarette, was a champion at super bantamweight, a champion at featherweight.
But Ray Vargas didn't exactly reign as a featherweight champion per se. He moved up in weight and took on Mark Magsayo, the then WBC champion, for the featherweight title, and he's moving up in weight in his very next fight.
He's going to be taking on O'Shaquie Foster, who sports a professional record of 19 wins with 2 losses, no draws, 11 knockouts.
And you know, if Ray Vargas wins that fight and becomes a 3-division champion, he procures the newly vacated WBC title that Shakur Stevenson once held.
And yeah, Navarette versus Ray Vargas remains a conversation, but just a conversation, just that.
It's been little more than just a conversation for some years now, and it'll remain a conversation if Ray Vargas wins, because they'll both be champions at the same weight, yet again, parallel to each other.
It's still just a conversation, though. They're separated by competing promotional outfits, competing platforms.
And that's if Ray Vargas wins. That's a best-case scenario, that he actually beats O'Shaquie Foster and becomes a 3-division champion. If he loses, he'll likely move back down to featherweight, where he still reigns as WBC champion.
The title that he won from Mark Magsayo.
If he loses to O'Shaquie Foster at 130 pounds, that pretty much puts the kibosh on any Emmanuel Navarette versus Ray Vargas talks.
It does.
Currently, Emmanuel Navarette is in talks to potentially take on Oscar Valdez at some point later on this year. He was very recently in action this past Friday opposite the Ring Australia's own Liam Wilson. He had to go through some adversity in order to become a 3-division champion, but he secured the W, he secured the WBO title, and he's in position.
He's held up his end of the bargain, and he's in line to take on Oscar Valdez in what is the super featherweight division's premier fight.
We're going to be honest here. Let's just be honest.
Let's do it.
Navarette versus Valdez is more of a conversation, more of a hot topic with the Mexican fans than Navarette versus Vargas is. Ray Vargas crossed over to the PBC in January of 2020, the year the pandemic hit. And it's hard to say that from January of 2020 till now, going over there has done anything for his profile, his overall notoriety. We do know that in the subsequent 3 years that followed that signing, he did see himself become a 2-division champion. He did see himself beat Mark Mixayo.
But what has that really done for his profile, the upcoming fight that he's about to have with O'Shaquie Foster?
Is anybody actually buzzing about that fight? Does anybody actually care? I understand that it is a fight of some significance after all. It is a title fight.
To some degree, it is important.
That's a fight with next to no profile. Next to no buzz. A fight that nobody's really talking about, nobody's really excited. Since having signed to the PBC in January of 2020, you do realize that Ray Vargas has only fought 2 times in that span of time.
You heard that right.
He's only fought twice under the promotional banner. This upcoming O'Shaquie Foster fight will be only the 3rd fight of Ray Vargas' tenure over there at the PBC. And on that kind of sparse schedule of activity, hard to say.
He might have won the WBC title against Mark Mixayo, and he might have become a 2-division champion, but it's hard to say any of that did anything for his profile.
Because the man's barely active. He barely fights.
Look, if he beats O'Shaquie Foster and he becomes the WBC champion at 130 pounds, I'm not against him facing either Oscar Valdez or Emmanuel Navarette, the winner of their fight. I'm not against it. I'm just saying.
He needs to cross the street. If he wants the winner of that fight, the winner of that fight will have more of a profile than he does. The winner of that fight, whoever it is, whether it's Oscar or Emmanuel, whoever wins that fight, they're the A-side to Ray Vargas.
Let's not beat around the bush here.
If he actually beats O'Shaquie Foster,
that's how it breaks down.
If he doesn't beat O'Shaquie Foster, well, this fight, it doesn't get off the ground.
It's dead.